This is a video for parents helping at home with their child's reading. At school, we generally use a few strategies when reading with groups or reading with individuals for when the child gets stuck or loses meaning while they're reading. At home, it can often be very tempting just to read in the word that they're struggling with, or tell them the word that they're struggling with, just to get through the reading or to keep the fluency of the reading going. But often by doing that, we are stopping the child from practicing and cementing the fix-up strategies that they've learnt at school. So this is a fix-up checklist that you can see on the screen now, and it's the fix-up checklist that I use in my class and that many other teachers use when working with students of all levels for whenever they're finding a particular word or passage or lose meaning in the reading. Now, as you work down these, some of these work more for picture books, some of them work more for chapter books, but they can be applied to all ages and all levels of reading ability, even adults. When you're reading something difficult or something that's new to you, you might need to use some of these fix-up strategies. So it's not that these are for lower readers, these are for all readers to use in their reading. So the general way it works is that if we lose meaning or get stuck in our reading, these are some of the things that we can try. And there's a list of them, and I wouldn't suggest trying all of them all the time, but certainly these are the ones you want to keep reminding your students to try if you see them getting stuck, or if you think that they are just reading the words and not really taking in what they're reading, the meaning. First of all, the most common and the most obvious one to ask them is, are you listening to yourself? Does that sound right, or does that make sense? Quite often the students, the children will just get into the habit of just reading the words, and they're not actually listening to the words they're saying. They're not listening to the meaning of the sentences, and so therefore their comprehension will completely break down. You need to listen to yourself read and think about what it is that you're reading. If you hear them clearly reading something wrong or saying something that doesn't make sense, then get them to read it again to check, please. Just ask them to read that again. They'll know that if you've asked the question, does that sound right, does that make sense, they'll know they've made a mistake, and they'll read it again to see what that mistake is. If they get to a difficult word, there's a couple of word attack strategies, they're known as, that you can try. You can get them to look at parts of the word that they do know. They might be able to spot in a longer word a word that they can work out. So that's a good place to go. They might be able to also look carefully at the start and end of those words. They might see a prefix, beginning with in, for example, that they can recognise, or they might have a suffix, so ing or ed, again, that they can recognise, and they can build from the bits of the word that they do know. So the first thing to do is to say, are there parts of the word that they do know that they can work from? Don't just give them the difficult word and carry on. They're not having to work for that knowledge. Then you're filling in the blanks for them. Occasionally they may miss punctuation. They may be reading too fast and not stopping at full stops at the end of sentences, for example. If you see them doing that regularly, you definitely need to pick them up on it. Don't just allow them to read fast straight through full stops. Make sure that you ask the question, have you read through a full stop? Ask them to check the punctuation and reread it again. Also, the other thing that they might do quite often is not notice the punctuation around speech. So if you can see that they haven't changed their style of speaking, or if the way that they've read the passage implies that you don't think they know that this is someone talking, then ask them to look for the speech marks. Is someone speaking in speech marks? And obviously you can encourage them to do a different voice or a funny voice for that person speaking. Also, if they come to a difficult word, one of the things you can do is to get them to sound out the word slowly. This is an old school technique, and we try not to use it too much. We try and get them to build those words from parts they do know that we saw earlier. But it still works that they can sound the word out slowly. So sounding out the first part, the blends they know, sounding out each individual letter until they work out what the word is. And when they've got it, then we definitely want them to reread that whole sentence again quickly. It's not a case of getting to this word here slowly and sounding it out and then carrying on. Go back and read that whole sentence, because that will give them the meaning again that we're looking for when we read. If they're just reading word for word for word for word for word, the fluency breaks down, the meaning breaks down. Other things you can do is in more junior books, in picture books, is to use those pictures to help them. Maybe there's something going on in the pictures that you can point out to them. So if they're stuck on a word like playing, for example, and there's a picture of some children playing, you can point them towards the pictures, and those visual clues might give them that more difficult word. Again, anything that avoids us actually telling them the word. We want them to think about it, work it out themselves, use the word attack strategies that we've talked about on this poster. Sometimes there might be a glossary to help them. This is more for the older readers if they've come across a word they're not sure of. Certainly in non-fiction, there might be a glossary that explains the word of meanings that they're not sure of. So encourage them to look around for glossary or footnotes in those more difficult books. Next, encourage them just to stop and think for a moment. What word could it be? What would make sense in that sentence? This is another word attack strategy. If they're reading a passage or a sentence and they come to a word they're not sure of, what word could it be? What would make sense? What other word could go there? And then they'll think of words that are similar to that word. Again, it's all about encouraging them to solve these problems rather than you just offering up the word every time they get stuck. And finally, another strategy is to just read on. Ignore the word they're stuck on, read on, and then go back and read it again. Maybe by reading the next line or two and then going back to the tricky bit, they can work out what that other word might have been. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but there are various strategies in here that you can use. So please check in with this video maybe a few times while you're listening to your child read, and indeed while you're reading yourself, and think to yourself, can I point out some of these strategies that I can get my child to use, rather than just telling them a difficult word, or rather than just get them to ignore the difficult word, or indeed to give up on the reading. And it's all about trying to make sure that the reading makes sense. So whenever they do come across something difficult or their reading slows down, it's very, very important that they go back and read that section again. And that will cement their comprehension and improve their overall reading. Again, if you've got any questions about this video, please come and see me, and thank you for listening.